So thank you all for coming, and apologies for being late. So I just want to start by putting this conversation in context. So I'm welcoming you on behalf of the Center for International Security Studies, which is a unit of the Woodrow Wilson School, co-directed by Professors Erin Friedberg and John Eikenberry. In this already small center, there is an even smaller program on India called India and the World, which I run, and we've been running it for some years. And one of the main things we do is actually engage with Indian public figures, in particular over the last 7 years. We've had members of Parliament come, 6 in each batch roughly, so there are about 36 Indian members of Parliament who've gone through the program. Mr. Gandhi needs, of course, no introduction, so I will not give him one. I will tell you about the nature of the conference in a little bit of time at the end, where we will open it up for questions. I hope you'll keep it in mind. So people in public life are confronted with the challenges of politics, without which you get nowhere, and then with the challenges of statesmanship, which is what to do at the broadest level in terms of policy. You can't do one without the other. And he's had senior experience at the national level, and perhaps no doubt will again. So I primarily want to engage him in a discussion of Indian statesmanship, which is at the broadest level. What are the questions facing the country? Where is it going? So on and so forth. So when it comes to question time, you might also remember it. So before we get to the business at hand, there's one slightly awkward point that I just wanted to bring up with you, especially for this audience, which is when you left India to come to college, for some strange reason you went to Harvard.
Yeah. I hadn't seen your campus.
That's good enough.
I hadn't seen it. If I had, I might have come here.
Come good. Very good. Excellent. Very good. So to business. So let me start by posing to you the question, which is to say, let's take 1992 as a baseline. A Congress government at that point began to change India's economy in fundamental ways. It's also maybe an age at which you yourself would have looked in great detail at what was going on in politics. It's been 25 years. What, in your judgment, is India's report card? What has gone well? What has not gone well across economics, human development, societal functioning, politics, across the whole range of things?
I think if you're actually looking at India, the 25-year time frame is way too small. 1947, we took a huge step. We got independence, and we started the process of transforming India. In fact, the process, it started even before that. It started when Mahatma Gandhi came, and you can take it back. You can take it back all the way to the first war of independence. But a sort of awakening happened in India, and India began to transform. The main transformation was an India that used to live in villages, an India that didn't communicate much, didn't talk to each other much, started to move. And this movement started slowly. Democracy helped it, telecommunications helped it, but progressively this movement started to become faster and faster. 92 was an important point because we took some decisions on opening up the economy. There were earlier very important points: the Green Revolution, the White Revolution, bank nationalization. There are a number of steps, each one empowering India in a certain way. After 1991, the movement accelerated. And basically what has been happening since 1991 to today is urbanization has speeded up and certain questions are being asked. India and China are basically the biggest migrations of people that history has ever seen. It has never happened before at this scale ever, right? One is democratic, free, the other is controlled. And so the central challenge that we're facing, and we've been facing from 91, is how does this movement progress and how do we make this transformation from a rural economy to a modern urban economy. The central question is, how does India give its people jobs? Because off the back of jobs, you can create a vision. If you as a modern country are unable to give your people jobs, it's very difficult to give them a vision.
Looking outside that filter for a second, in terms of societal functioning, so I mentioned let's say social mobility, kind of intergroup harmony, gender equity, or social trust. What's your sense over the last 25 years? Has the enhanced processes that you described, how have they interacted on these indices?
Caste structure,
for example,
which is central, has weakened. Democracy has been eroding it. I don't think it's been doing it fast enough. And new forms of hierarchy are being created. So on the social mobility, quite a lot of progress, a lot more to be done. Economics, very good movement, but increasing inequality. And that is now becoming a problem.
Education, skills, health, sort of human development.
Look, if you're comparing us,
just over the 25-year period. So just as in your sense of the trend line.
I would say decent performance, but the problems are changing. So the demands are increasing, and what we did previously is not going to be good enough going forward.
Right.
So if you take education, excellent top level, and that's you represent that IITs, IIMs, ISBDs, excellent top level, but no scale of that quality. So large numbers of states having education systems which are not really doing their job. If you go to Bihar, you go to Uttar Pradesh, you go to other northern states, it's not happening. Right? Same on the healthcare. Excellent healthcare at the higher level, but if you go to a state like Uttar Pradesh and you're a poor person, you want medical help.
Right. So just picking up on that a little bit. So one of the numbers that has struck me is that the demand for private schooling continues to increase, which is if you look at the percentages of people who are sending their children to private schools. In the urban areas, it was always high. Even in the rural areas, it's actually been going up. What do you think is going on there? Which is,
you can't. One thing I would caution you with is taking one lens and placing it on top of India. Public school system in Kerala, pretty good. Public school system in Tamil Nadu, excellent. Right? So one thing that we tend to do is say, okay, let's take one paintbrush and brush the whole of India. I can tell you states where the public school system is doing superb. I can tell you states where it's doing badly. Right? And each state is its own little ecosystem. And each state has certain strengths and certain weaknesses. So it's much better to look at India as a number of states and then to think about how those states are performing on these axes. Just broadly saying private schools doing well, public schools doing badly, that doesn't actually, it's not accurate.
Actually, to be fair, the same report I was looking at, it doesn't necessarily say private schools are doing better in terms of outcomes, simply that parents are choosing to send their children to private schools. In other words, when they test them, it's not necessarily the case.
My sense is we're not spending enough on education and health.
Okay.
And that's why that's happening. Okay. If you go to UP private schools, you'll find that there's not much going on there.
Very good. So you kind of segued into that anyway. So the next thing I was going to say was, over the next decade, to take a shorter lens, what do you see as the central challenges facing India?
Jobs.
Jobs.
And the numbers are pretty simple. 30,000 new youngsters coming into the job market every single day. 450 jobs being provided today. So you can do the math. And that doesn't include unemployed people. That's just, if we start the clock now, and we stop it same time tomorrow, 24 hours from now, 30,000 new people just came in. and we gave 450 of them a job. So that to me is the central problem. Second issue, huge migration to cities, and cities not being equipped to handle the type of pressures that they're coming under. Uh, Scaling up healthcare, scaling up education. Those I would say are the central problems.
Um, in terms of social societal functioning, so you mentioned that the caste system has been eroded somewhat.
And different states have done different things. So Tamil Nadu's done quite a good job. Uttar Pradesh has not done such a good job. So I mean, again, successes in certain areas and less success in certain areas.
Right. On issues of gender equity, sort of are there particular things over the next 10 years?
I mean, if you ask me, nowhere near enough has been done on gender equity. That's to me a real area of focus. I mean, we've done quite a lot of work in the political space, but there's a lot of.
Let me just again go back to the.
Now, I'm not saying that good work hasn't been done.
Right.
I'm saying I would like the speed to pick up significantly.
Right. So going again back over the last period historically. So you're at the center of the political system. Do you feel that the Indian political system is more able to craft responses to Indian challenges today than 25 years ago? Less or about the same? As a whole, which includes what the executive does, what the legislature does, kind of broadly speaking. Is government better or worse able to respond? Maybe not just over the last 3 years.
No, I'm saying that's a very rigid question.
Please.
I view it like a flow, like a movement of people, like a movement of ideas. So these systems also are evolving. Certain challenges come up, so the systems need to react to those challenges. I think there are a couple of very big challenges coming up, and I'm seeing certain weaknesses in the system's ability to respond to them. But overall, if you look compared to large percentage of the world, we've done pretty well. I mean, as I said in my last discussion, between China and us, nobody has taken more people out of poverty. And frankly, look back 10,000 years, there is no democratic country that has been able to take as many people out of poverty as India. It doesn't exist. So that's a huge success. The scale is massive. So you will always have certain things not working, certain things working very well. I get worried when I see fundamental structural problems.
Right.
So let me take a step back. If you look at blue collar jobs today, China dominates them. They dominate them because they have a particular type of political system. They use coercion to dominate them, but they've got a competitive advantage in that space. Democratic countries are struggling to produce blue-collar jobs at the rate. That to me is a real problem. And that's a problem in the United States, it's a problem in India, it's a problem in Europe. You can go to any of these democratic countries and ask them, and they'll tell you that yes, we're struggling to get the blue-collar jobs. You can't not have blue-collar jobs when you're a big country. You can do it when you're a Singapore, but if you're in India or you're in England or in America, you can't do it. And that gap is what is creating the churn in the politics in our countries, the sort of disaffection, the anger that you see.
And of course, as you know, the share of manufacturing of world GDP, of course, has been shrinking forever. And at some level, in the classic analysis, that's what should happen because people should move to jobs which are. But I agree with you actually, which is to say that that may be true in some very long run sense. But in the short run, that certainly means a massive amount of displacement, which is hard to.
I think again, I think the term manufacturing has completely transformed. So even the clear division between manufacturing and services that we used to use,
Right.
I don't think it's a very valid split. Traditionally, manufacturing units were silos. And the general mindset is that it was a concrete structure with things being manufactured inside. That's not what modern manufacturing is. Modern manufacturing, those concrete structures are actually networks. And those networks are linked to the services system and everything. So again, splitting clearly, saying, manufacturing is separate, services separate, problematic.
I would agree with that. But what it points to, as you're pointing out, is of course it means that manufacturing jobs also now involve a level of skill, which is.
I think a much better frame
Right.
is jobs. Right? A much better frame is, from my perspective or your perspective, India is creating 400 million, is moving 400 million people from a rural to an urban environment. Doesn't matter how we employ them.
Right.
We have to employ them.
Correct.
And we are highly unlikely to employ 400 large numbers, hundreds of millions of people in services.
So in fact, you were just in California, and so let me take the opportunity to go a bit further along the line. So one of the things I think you were speaking to people who are at the cutting edge of automation, artificial intelligence-based systems, and so on. Do you see this impacting this process of creating jobs? In a sense, take a driver, right? I mean, you could move from a village and get employed as a driver in a city, but of course, if you get self-driving cars, that's a category of jobs. Mr. Gandhi, in fact, just announced that he's going to ban self-driving cars.
He's going to ban self-driving cars.
This is in the press that he said that this would. I'm fairly sure I have this right.
This is the same argument that was made when India was moving into computers. Mm-hmm. That computers will take away jobs. I've heard both sides. I've heard that self-driving cars and the like will take away jobs from people. I've also heard that they will create many more jobs for people. My sense is that I think there will always be jobs. So even though I've heard that, I don't think that jobs are going to disappear because of automation. That's my sense. I think the nature of a job will change.
Correct.
And the structure of a job will change.
Right.
But I don't think we will live in a world where human beings don't have anything to do.
Well, I think the issue is a bit more. Again, well, that's a separate discussion. We'll come back next time.
I mean, human beings will always find something to do.
People with titles of books like Singularity Theory, where let's leave that aside. That's a too far. But on the other hand, a given stock of people, and again, this is an issue, as you correctly said, it's an issue worldwide, which is given stock of people with a set of skills. The question is, the new jobs that. See, the last two industrial revolutions, the first one and the second one, which took place in the 20s, the people who lost jobs in it were not necessarily the ones who gained jobs when the new jobs were created. Right? So, because after a certain age, it's very hard to retrain people. So the issue in a little bit is that there's a certain flow of young Indians coming in. And if the technology frontier evolves, will they be able to be skilled in a way that they can keep up with this evolving thing? Right? So it's a question. So anyway, you've obviously engaging with people who.
I think I'm an optimist, so I think human beings will find a way.
Good news for us professors.
I think Sam and me speak quite a lot about this, but I think the nature of a job and the nature of education is going to have to change. Our education system is a 20th century education system. It's an industrial revolution education system. So we spend quite a lot of time thinking about how the 21st century education system will look. And I think it will be centered much more around concepts than around subjects. So I think you will get people who will specialize you will get people who will specialize in a completely different way than they currently specialize, because the boundaries between chemistry and physics and maths will start to disappear. And I think
it'll all become physics. I hope. My own kind of interest at heart. Right.
Your voice is very tall.
Yes, well, my voice is faint to begin with.
I think it will close.
If that helps?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Anyway, you come to hear him, so it may not matter. Right. Okay, excellent. So now let me turn to the second part of the discussion I want to engage you in. So, in the context of India, there is the Indian political system, which is an instrument for meeting some of these challenges. So let me start with the question, of the things that you're mentioning, are there things that you think the government must do, and are there things also that you think the government maybe can't do? These are societal challenges, eventually we'll have to make them.
I think 25 years, India's had a good record on growth. But whether it was the UPA time or it's the NDA time, I mean, we did slightly better than the NDA, but the job numbers are nowhere near what they should be. And that is the crux. India has to figure out a way to solve this problem. And my view, I like the Make in India concept, but my view is that the targeting of the Make in India concept should be different. So, Prime Minister feels that the targeting of the Make in India concept should be large businesses. I feel that the Make in India concept should be targeted towards small and medium businesses. So I feel that the problem is that not enough small and medium businesses are getting access to finance, are getting access to the legal system, are getting access to the political system. So you have large companies who have a role, but then the small companies that should be turning into large companies and the medium companies that should be turning into large companies, that's not happening. And to me, that's where the real jobs are going to come from. Another thing, agricultural value add. So you have to see this as a migration between rural and urban, as a movement from agricultural to sort of urban jobs. So you can't also just ignore agriculture. You can't say that, okay, now we are going to focus on the cities and we are going to leave agriculture out. There's a lot of jobs that will come out of agriculture if you put in things like cold chains, if you take food processing units close to farms. 40% of our vegetables rot today. Right? That's a huge waste, and that's large numbers of jobs could ensure that those vegetables don't rot.
And you see this as a case for direct government action, or government should be facilitating in terms of a regulatory framework?
I mean, it's different in different places. So there is an element of building infrastructure. There is an element of opening up the financial system. There is an element of opening up the political system. So to me, the central problem in India is the centralization of the political system.
Perfect, because the next thing I was going to ask you was, how can Indian governance be improved? And let me throw some words and then you can make of them what you will. Is there a lack of expert knowledge? Is it a question of talent? Is it a question of transparency, which concerned you during the last UPA regime? Is it devolution? And finally, is it, in some sense, a question of competition? If you have different governments in a country, different states, the exit option to go from here to there, often can be a powerful spur to, efficiency on the part of all of them.
There are many issues, but to me, the biggest by far is centralization of power. So if you look at our national government, you look at our state government, too few people control too much. A chief minister of a state or the prime minister has much too much power to influence things far outside. Chief ministers can decide what happens to a village road. local government should decide what happens to a village road. So it is not only a question of decentralization of power, it is a question of the right amount of decentralization of power to the right level. Right? So the members of parliament have a role, the MLAs have a role, the pradhans have a role, the bureaucrats have a role. And power has to be shifted out to them so that each one of them has work to do. Today, if you look at our lawmaking structure, you look at parliament, and you look at the laws, you look at pretty much any law that's made, parliament itself just validates the law. The lawmaking process is carried out in the ministries and by bureaucrats. Right? So that's a huge problem.
So, moving along with the flow, so let's turn to Parliament. What you say is of course completely correct. Now, I would say this is another of the global problems, by the way, which is across democracies, legislatures have been losing power to the executive on one side and the judiciary on the other. A lot of lawmaking is administrative lawmaking or judicial lawmaking, by now, in the political landscape. Partly happens because legislators have to spend all their time, sort of running for office. That because often the relatively short cycles, maybe the scale isn't correct, in terms of their discretionary function. I think the representative function has been enhanced, but maybe their judgment function. So it's not something that's only a problem in India, that's right. But let's look in India. Can you think of ways that you would like to see, which would sort of enhance the relative power of the legislature? I mean, again, I'll throw some ideas at you. There's the idea that maybe something you could personally do something about, that there should be a shadow cabinet to give an explicit sense that there is people who are doing that. Committee staffs to allow, because again, this is now expert knowledge. American committees have very expert staff, so there's a lot of subsidy. Then there's the issue that, one of the great accomplishments of Mr. Rajiv Gandhi actually was to put in the anti-defection law, which at that point really stabilized the system. But on the other hand, it's a very Procrustean sort of law. And the question is whether if MPs had some freedom on some issues which are not, mission critical, to sort of wander from, are these all things that you think about as things that ought to?
When I think of the governance system, I would like to see much more transparency in processes. So we have a committee system in India, but it's closed. Nobody knows what happens inside the committee system. I mean, I sit on a couple of committees, and it's 20 people, and nobody sees it. So bringing in other people, making these things accessible to people, to see actually what's going on in the lawmaking process, to make these lawmaking process transparent, that's a very powerful thing. I don't think there's an expertise problem in India. There's an access to information problem in India. And I think that's something that I've spent quite a lot of my time working on it. Internally in the party, particularly in the youth organizations, democratizing, holding elections. But you get a backlash because it disturbs people. People don't like transparency.
Yeah, that's probably true. US campus also.
It's disruptive. So
if you're
transparency is not easy, but it's powerful.
So there was something you said I wanted to pick up on. You were talking about the what did you use the word?
Transparency.
Transparency. You were talking about legislatures. About expertise.
Expertise.
So I remember a discussion with. I wouldn't be able to quote the numbers for you. It was with the economist Dr. Indira Rajaraman. She had looked at relative high-level expertise in China's government versus India. So India has a large bureaucracy, but for instance, the number of IAS officers, who you would consider the brains of the bureaucracy. Her thesis was that in fact, India's bureaucracy was very bottom-heavy. It actually, so I was talking about expertise within government. There could be a lot outside. That there wasn't enough high-level expertise. For instance, in the India-China comparison. I don't know if this is something that you...
See, you have 100 students in this room. You open out processes, they will become experts. They will look at the processes, understand the processes, become experts. You close the processes, and then you say, we got no experts, that doesn't make sense. So people used to say, oh, in the 1950s, a lot of brilliant debates used to take place in Parliament House. Of course, they used to take place because those members of Parliament were actually making laws. Right? We sit in Parliament, we have conversations, but we don't make laws in Parliament. Laws are made by bureaucrats and by ministers. Now, after that you say that this debate is of poor quality. Of course, it's poor quality. Bring the lawmaking system, make parliamentarians make laws, and either they'll become experts, or people who are experts will come and help them. So, to me, it's all about opening up the structure. And if you look at India's successes, and you look at the Green Revolution, you look at 1991, every single time we have opened up some process or the other. Even Sam sitting here, it was a decentralization of power through the telephone, through the computer, that transformed India. So to me, decentralization is always good in India. Opening up is always good. Giving access to people is always good. Closing access, shutting down structures is not good.
Okay, so to summarize, your take would be that if government was more open to flows, the flows will come from outside, they don't have to be inside.
There's no, in my view, you create a process, you open a process out, and people will look at that process and you will find the experts. They will figure out how to solve that problem. Right? And if they're not there, they will learn and they will come. But if the process is closed, if I was to ask this room, what were the steps that were taken in making the RTI law? How many of you can answer that question? Nobody. Well, how can you be experts? But if I was to tell you, this is the structure, this is what we did, this is how we thought about it, a lot of you would become pretty good at understanding it. So to me, it's always about opening up.
All right. The judiciary. So there were two. Let me ask the first question, which is, so it's still the case, justice delayed is justice denied, and it's not just a question of justice, it's also that even business efficiency is impeded when you can't enforce contracts on reasonable timescales. Is this something that's fixable? What are the barriers? Are these
Again, complete centralization. Pretty much every case ends up in the Supreme Court. Right? So decentralize, make the district courts actually work, make the state courts actually work, and solve the problem at the periphery instead of bringing every single problem to the center. The Supreme Court is supposed to give you direction. It's supposed to work on fundamental cases. Right? So that's the problem everywhere in India. It is concentration of power. India immediately tries to concentrate power. And good governance in India is about resisting that and about making sure that you're actually bringing more people in and distributing power.
Speaking of fundamental issues before the court, but now let me ask it from a slightly different point of view, just from the Supreme Court. So recently they announced a right to privacy. Now, even in the United States, there's a long discussion of whether the Constitution is a living Constitution or not. And one argument that people make for the discovery of new fundamental rights by successive generations of judges, in private at any rate, is that the American Constitution is extraordinarily hard to amend, because it takes 3/4 of the states and so on. The Indian Constitution, statistically, is not that hard to amend. It's been amended 100 times. So in a sense, is this a power grab by the judiciary that the legislature should resist?
An institution is basically a monopoly of a particular type of information. A judge 20 years ago had a monopoly on his court. The mobile phone has destroyed that monopoly. Today you can have someone outside the courtroom suddenly saying, actually, I don't agree with your process, and here, I'm going to do an investigation that is going to prove you're wrong. We're sitting in this classroom. 20 years ago, what we said would be considered to be absolutely correct. Well, the professor's space has been taken over. Suddenly, the kids go and say, listen, sorry, what you're saying is wrong, I've just gone to the internet, I don't agree with you. So connectivity is actually disrupted institutions across the board. And then when the space is opening out, different institutions are moving into the space of other institutions. So in a sense, in a democratic environment, there is a conflict going on, institutional conflict taking place. And that's what you see when the judiciary takes an action and then the legislature takes another action. That fight is because your institutions have been penetrated by connectivity.
I should say that in physics my problem is generally that not that somebody looks up Wikipedia to correct me, but they're busy checking their Facebook page and not doing the algebra that should be.
But that's still sort of encroachment over your domain.
It is, but it was their cost, not mine. That's true. Very good.
No, so we struggle with that, right? We have.
I can also make the point more broadly, which is, of course, it's true there's this flood of information, but it's also distracting to the processes because there's a lot of useless information.
Oh, absolutely. So we can have a long conversation about policy and about structure, and then somebody can tweet something, and that's much more powerful than So it is the age of the image or the age of the tweet, and that's part of the disruption.
So people in the room and watching in India, don't tweet. Listen to what we have to say. All right, great. How are we doing in time? Because we do want to leave a little. So I think maybe I'll try and speed up, and so that we can then open up for questions. Okay. So I was going to ask you something about the party system and the Congress, but can I maybe, just in the interest of time, I'll skip to your views on. Let me ask you one question, which is that there is a process. You are already Vice President of Congress. There's a process underway. Not unlikely that maybe come October you'll head the Congress. Do you have some plans for what you want to do in the party, which would better prepare it to?
I mean, we were in power for 10 years. And in 2014, we had a vision that began in 2004, and by 2012, we felt that vision had run into trouble. So, large part of what we're going to do is going to work on a vision for the next 10 years. That will focus on how to solve the job problem. It will focus on agriculture, education, and healthcare. And we are going to build that vision not top down, but bottom up. So we'll build that vision by coming to students, coming to other stakeholders and asking them, listen, what do you think? How should India look at this problem? How do we deal with this problem? And sort of try to build up a vision using that. I think I've come here to the United States, and I like to tell you this, that most of the Indian people here, whenever India has made big shifts, it has always done so on the back of non-resident Indians. People don't say this, but India's freedom movement, Mahatma Gandhi was a non-resident Indian. Jawaharlal Nehru was, Ambedkar was, Patel was. So you have a huge role to play. And I would like you to be involved in that. There is a particular vision currently in operation in India, and there are people who believe in that vision. I don't agree with that vision, but I think it's important that an alternative vision is also placed on the table.
So turning now to sort of
one more thing.
Please, yeah.
I think, as I said to you earlier, what I would like to try and push forward is a transformation of the Lok Sabha, transformation of the Vidhan Sabha. I'd like to see an India where members of parliament, members of legislative assembly are actually involved in some of these processes. I'd like to open up some of these lawmaking processes, not only to MPs and MLAs, but to students like you. And I'd like you to participate in some of those, in the processes of making those laws. So setting up structures whereby students can come in, help us. Setting up structures where people, experts from outside, like you do in the United States, could come in and help us with the lawmaking structure is something that I would be trying to do.
Very good. So now, sort of sitting in Delhi and looking out, there is, there are major transitions that take place in the international system and can take place. So the United States is now and has been since the end of World War II the dominant global power. Prior to that, it was Britain. And the question in everyone's mind who thinks about these things is, of course, the extraordinary rise of China, which of course has been extraordinarily beneficial to the Chinese people and is one of the great success stories of our times economically. It's also the return of a great civilization to the frontiers of human accomplishment. All of that is, of course, great. On the other hand, it's also a nation state with an army and other instruments, of course. So the question is, and India is right next to China. We just had this Doklam standoff which represents a sort of continuing thing. So the triplet of questions for you there is, what do you see as the challenge of rising Chinese power? Item one. Item two, does it matter that China is currently not a democracy in the sense in which India is? Do you think China will democratize? Will that make a difference to it? And finally, given a certain assessment of the problem, what do you think India should do?
There are two large migrations taking place of people. One is completely free, and the other is centrally organized. The systems respond differently. But you're saying China, I'd like to add India to that. There are two huge countries that are transforming from agricultural countries to urban modern countries, and that's huge chunk of the world population, right? And how these two countries do is going to fundamentally reshape the world. It's not my place to sit here and say China should be democratic or should not be democratic. They've chosen their path and we've chosen our path. But there is cooperation and there is competition. We have to figure out how to get our jobs. We have to figure out how to get our people working. And the competition is with China. So we have to basically compete with them. And frankly, we're not doing that well. So that's point number one. Point number two is that China is entering spaces with one belt, one road. And China has a particular vision of the world. It's very clear. And from their perspective, it's a powerful vision. Does India have a similar vision? What does that vision look like? How much cooperation is there going to be between us and them? These are basically the fundamental questions going forward. But the thing to realize is China is moving with tremendous power. And we have to work with that. I think there's a lot of space for cooperation between the United States and India in the creation of jobs, in education. So I think there's a lot of synergy between the two countries. India also historically has maintained balance. So India has had a relationship with China, it has had a relationship with Russia, it has had a relationship with the United States, it has had a relationship with Iran and a number of countries. So to me, the strategic relationship with the United States is important. But balance is also important in terms of all the other countries around us. So that's there. I would say there is a slight difference between us and the government. So that would be the lay of the land.
And then looking a bit closer, so there's obviously our neighbors in India's neighbors in South Asia. There's the age-old problem of Pakistan, and which is tied up with Kashmir, which is a military issue. There's a particular nuclear issue because the nuclear arsenals involved keep growing. Then there are other neighbors, Bangladesh, Nepal. There's now Burma, Sri Lanka. So how do you see the sort of situation there?
See, people generally tend to think that systems move in a linear fashion. They draw out a line and they say this is what it looks like. If it's going at 9%, it's going to keep going at 9%. If it's going at 3%, it's going to keep going at 3%. Or if you see a nice little upward curve, this curve is going to continue. That's not how big systems operate. Big systems move in exponential ways. Suddenly something can happen and it can move in a different direction. So to me, the single biggest achievement of the Congress Party, and I say this right from Gandhiji's days, is giving everybody in India a vision. Not creating a vision for a certain group of people, but making a vision for everybody and making everybody feel that they're part of that vision. In the 21st century, if you leave people out of your vision, you're asking for trouble. New ideas will come, different visions will develop. And so to me, central challenge in India is the politics of polarization, where you pit one community against another and you create spaces for other people to come in. There is a belt of 100 million tribal people. Today, they do not feel comfortable with the vision. There are a number of states in India which don't want a single vision forced down their throat. There are minority communities that don't feel that they are part of the vision. So to me, that's where the real danger is. And India's strength has always been, and historically, not from the last 20 years or 50 years, but thousands of years, India's strength has always been the ability to embrace people and allow them to flourish inside our system. And that is something that is being challenged today in India. And everything is placed on top of that structure. Whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's growth, every single thing, jobs, is placed on top of that structure of harmony. If you fiddle that structure of harmony, you will get things happening that you don't expect. And so to me, that is the central risk that India is facing. And India lives in a volatile neighborhood. And if we alienate our own people, that opens up space for people to do mischief. I don't need to name who those people are, but it opens up space for them.
So you would say the way you think about South Asia is it's a uniform cultural matrix and affected heavily by what happens inside India in terms of its capacity to include.
No, I'm saying India as it is currently needs to carry every single person in India. Every single person in India needs to feel that, listen, here is a national vision and I can see my space in it. Leaving hundreds of millions of people outside that vision is not a good idea, because other people will start to create problems. If you don't give the tribals in the entire tribal belt a clear sense of how they are going to engage with India, what their future in India is, they'll look for another imagination. And that to me is the central problem and the biggest difference between our opposition, Mr. Modi and the BJP, and us.
What I'm going to do now is open the floor and take a break from being in the limelight myself. Okay, one.
So I have a pretty simple question actually. You've talked very extensively about economic issues, so I'm going to skip those questions because you already answered most of them. My primary question is about your position, and by extension, since you're here representing the Indian National Congress. on the Uniform Civil Code. And before you answer, I just want to point out that most arguments against a Uniform Civil Code in India rely on the fact that it's a diverse country, people have different religions, different beliefs. But if you look at all successful democracies, and I'm sure you'd agree that most of Western Europe and the United States up till now have been successful democracies, have stressed the need for a Uniform Civil Code. And the need to have some basic laws which govern everyone, which, quite frankly, India does not have at this point.
I leave that idea to the courts of our country. The courts will decide, and I have faith in the courts of our country.
At the back. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. My name's Andy. I'm a graduate student here at the Woodrow Wilson School. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. You said earlier that people are going to figure out something to do regardless of how much automation happens. You also said that India, especially as a big country, has to find blue-collar jobs for its people. It occurs to me that the first casualty of automation is blue-collar jobs. So what, in your mind, is an example of a blue-collar job in an automated economy?
I think the nature, what we today call a blue-collar job, is going to change, right? But the question is, who is going to have those jobs, and which country is going to have access to those jobs? So currently, you have a factory system, say in China, with 20,000-30,000 people working in them. That's something that is not replicable by India. But I don't think that's necessarily what the world will look like 15 years from today. So the question is, can a country like India access some of those jobs? And what do we need to do to access those jobs? What are the type of things we need to change in our system, in our education system, in our banking system, to get at some of those jobs? But I think what we call a blue-collar job today is not going to be the same tomorrow.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. I just have two questions for you. The first, you quoted Gandhi ji, and I really believe what he said, that the soul of the country of India lies in its villages. And you spoke about the transformation from the agrarian to the service sector. Is the government looking at development in the agriculture sector and not necessarily a movement? Because I believe when 60% of the country is employed in the agricultural sector, we should look at automating that and looking at development within the sector than pushing the people for intersectoral growth. My second question is, when you spoke about tribals, and having worked in tribal areas, a lot of contentious issues in tribal areas happened during 2006, 2009. Where even in Kalinganagar, 13 tribals lost their lives in a firing issue. Taking a step back, now that you feel so strongly about tribal rights in the country, what do you feel can be done in that direction?
What is the first question? Gandhiji. When you talk about, the first thing to realize is that Gandhiji was an evolving person, right? And he was a very flexible mind. When Gandhiji said village India, he actually meant a decentralized system. He didn't mean that India should remain where it was in 1947. The heart of a village is that it is decentralized. So Mahatma Gandhi's vision of India was a decentralized vision of India. I don't think he meant, which a lot of people say, but I don't think he meant that India should remain in its
agricultural development.
Yeah, I'll come to that. I don't think he meant that India should remain in village form. But I think what he was saying was that the village form of government, the decentralized form of government, is a powerful form of government. And actually, if you look at how technology is moving, a lot of what he said is actually coming true. India simply cannot forget about agriculture. And India simply will not be able to create the jobs it needs without modernizing agriculture, without setting up agricultural food chains, without supporting agriculture. So, again, between us and the BJP, there is a difference in opinion on agriculture. But I personally feel that agriculture has to be supported, and it's a strategic opportunity for India if it is supported properly. What was your second question about the tribal?
About your plans of how do you look
I
at
think
tribal development?
when we were in government, we were protecting the space of the tribals. Tribal bill protecting their land, giving them rights to the forest. So our idea was to create a space for them where they are protected, and you can create a space for them where they are protected physically, and you can also create it in the political system. So the way we would act is to ensure that tribals in their space are protected and not encroached upon, and that they have a certain set of rights that makes them feel protected.
Hi, my name is Anita Gupta. I'm actually a graduate
Sorry,
student
can I
here.
just, sorry, is it okay if I just finish that? The question of land acquisition, sorry you sat down, but the question of land acquisition is central. You will sit down, no problem. I can see you. I'll stand up. The question of land acquisition is also central. How you acquire land in tribal areas, what are the rules for acquisition, and Nyamgiri became a central case here. So we constructed a land acquisition bill that would protect them. We made sure that if someone wants to acquire tribal land, they have to take permission from local governments. So those type of protections we had put in place, but I think that's the direction. No, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my name is Anita Gupta. I'm actually a graduate student here at Princeton University at the Woodrow Wilson School. My question is actually about twofold. Here in the United States, we're faced with a rapidly unfolding healthcare system that we're all witnessing as of today.
Unfolding
Meaning it's falling apart.
collapsing.
Collapsing, and a constant debate here in the United States.
Why is that happening?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, but we can talk about that later. But I'm curious because you had mentioned in India that there's a lot of young youth, 30,000 that are, looking for jobs. And we know that in India there's a lot of individuals that are suffering too with public health related issues. In particular, something that's interesting to me is the drug related issues. Here in the United States, there's many people that are overdosing on opioids, and I know in India that issue is very, very serious. Morphine, similar drugs like that. I'm wondering what the initiatives are that are in place in India. What initiatives are being done for those young youths that are jobless, that don't have jobs, that might be going to drugs? Are there initiatives, and what is being done for healthcare in India? What is the vision?
Well, we're not in government in India, by the way. So
I know.
What is being done? Don't ask me. But we are in government in Punjab. Where are you from? Punjab?
North
No.
UP, Uttar
North
Pradesh,
UP.
Agra.
But we are in government in Punjab, and drugs is a serious problem in Punjab, and we are working on combating that problem in Punjab, setting up rehabilitation clinics, trying to move industry back into Punjab. It had moved out, introducing sports into the system. So we are working on drugs in Punjab, but I won't be able to tell you what the government of India is doing on that front. I'm not involved in running the government of India right now.
Hello, Mr. Gandhi. Thank you for coming. So my question is this: your role in the country is now as a member of the opposition to critique the government, find flaws in their policies, and so on. But surely there must be something that you admire that the Modi government has done, and that you probably wish that your government did when it had power for 10 years. If there's one such thing, what would it be?
Again, I think the Make in India idea is a good idea, and I think if that idea is implemented well, it's a powerful idea. I would think about it slightly differently, but as a concept, saying that we need to make in India, I think that's a good concept. That's a good direction. How I would implement it would be slightly different. GST, something where we agree with the government. We in fact helped the government pass GST. Again, On the fine tuning, slight differences. We would have preferred a uniform GST, they chose 5 levels. We would have preferred a slow implementation, they chose a faster implementation. So, but I would say on GST broadly, we agree with their direction. I think so. There are spaces where we would agree with them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, if you look at the economic policy, broadly, between us and the BJP, there's agreement. There's not much difference between our economic policy and theirs, other than the fact that we tend to do things like Narega and do things like right to food. On the liberalization front, on the big business front, we're very similar. We have a central difference with the BJP, which is that we feel that India needs to carry everybody. And we feel that it's dangerous if India doesn't carry everybody. That's the central difference. But there is a reasonable amount of agreement on economic policy.
Actually, I'd like to see the faculty better represented. I see in the front row Professor Bernard Hickel and our visiting distinguished Professor Sunil Kilani. One of them would like to say something.
Oh, you didn't see that.
So, Bernard, would you like to?
Well, I mean, first, thank you very much for coming here. I would like you to, think perhaps comparatively with the United States. I mean, some would argue that given the nature of new technologies, given that facts are becoming questionable in terms of how you present them, the rise of the popular charismatic leader, the politics of exclusion versus that of inclusion, all of that is extremely disruptive to old patterns of governance. And in what way, some might even argue that, what's happening in India or what's happening in the United States is a vernacularization of politics. A new type of person is coming and having greater say than before. Old elites, Anglo-speaking elites, are being displaced. That you represent, in a sense, that displacement. Can you sort of tell us something about actually the failure of politically to this new force, and how does it compare to what you see happening in the United States?
I think the central reason why Mr. Modi arose, and to an extent why Mr. Trump came, is the question of jobs in India and in the United States. There's a large part of our populations that simply do not have jobs and cannot see a future. And so they are feeling pain. And they have supported these type of leaders. The problem is that the record on jobs of these leaders, I don't know Trump, so I won't go there, but certainly our Prime Minister is not good enough. So those same people who got angry with us because we couldn't deliver on those 30,000 jobs are going to get angry with Mr. Modi. The central question is resolving that problem. My main issue with Mr. Modi is that he diverts that issue. And he says that he points the finger somewhere else instead of saying, listen, we have a problem. We need to transform ourselves to compete with the Chinese. And we need to get 30,000 out of 30,000 people, we need to get 10, 15, 20,000 people jobs. So that is the central issue. There's anger building up in India right now. We can sense it. Right? So to me, the challenge is how to solve that job problem in a democratic environment. That's the challenge. And frankly, the Congress party was unable to do it. That's why Mr. Modi came. But Mr. Modi is unable to do it. And it is a deeper problem, so we have to first accept it as a problem. And then we have to unite and try to work at solving it. Right now, nobody is even accepting it as a problem. the discussion is about 9% growth, 8% growth, 7% growth. The discussion is not about how many of your millions of people that are moving you've given a job to. That's not the discussion. That needs to be the discussion.
First a round of applause, then he gets to say hello. Then